Today, we're discussing superior private flood insurance versus the federal flood insurance program. So if you're a property owner, you're an insurance agent, you're trying to understand the difference between these two flood insurance options to make sure that properties like this one right here are properly protected, then stay tuned in this video. Hello, my name is Chris Green, president and owner of the FloodInsuranceGuru, and today we were discussing superior private flood insurance versus the federal flood insurance program, also known as the National Flood Insurance Program. Today we're going to be talking about things like coverages. We're going to be talking about pricing. We're going to be talking about renewals. And we're also going to be discussing claims. You know, how are all these things handled with private flood insurance versus FEMA? What do you need to know when you're comparing these two options? So let's start with the National Flood Insurance Program first, because that's the easy one that everybody mostly knows about. On a building just like this one right here, it's important to understand that things like replacement cost, things like distance to water, you can't see, but just water sitting right in front of us, elevation of the property, these are all things that kind of contribute to pricing. So then what coverages does the National Flood Insurance Program offer on properties like this? We're talking about coverages up to $250,000 on the building, and we're talking about coverages up to $100,000 on personal contents or personal belongings coverage. There's no loss of use or additional living expenses available right now with the National Flood Insurance Program. What about renewal? You know, with the National Flood Insurance Program, a policy is automatically going to renew as long as you've got everything in place, as long as your community is in what's called a participating community with the National Flood Insurance Program. There's a few exceptions where a policy could be non-renewed. Typically, it's a builder's risk policy or another exception, but it's extremely rare for something to be non-renewed with the National Flood Insurance Program. It typically has to do with documentation. Now let's talk about superior private flood insurance. So let's talk about coverages. Superior private flood insurance has been around since 2000. They're what's called a private flood insurance company. They offer what's called a non-admitted private flood insurance product. You can click up in the corner of this video to understand the difference between admitted and non-admitted. But we're talking about coverages on a building like this right here, of building coverage up to $600,000. That goes a lot further than building coverage of $250,000. As you can imagine, here in late 2023, $250,000 is not going very far to replace that property. On your personal contents coverage, they offer up to $50,000 in most situations. There is a rare exception where they can go up to $100,000. However, unlike the National Flood Insurance Program, they offer additional living expenses or loss of use up to $30,000. Now, this could help pay for a hotel for up to 6 months while your house is being repaired. This is a coverage that's not offered through the National Flood Insurance Program. Let's talk a little bit about pricing now. Now, with superior private flood insurance, they actually design their own pricing based on the contracts they have with their reinsurance companies. Their pricing, though, takes into consideration replacement costs, distance to water, many other factors like claims history, your flood risk score. If you're in a 20-year area, more than likely, they're not going to be a good solution there. Now, all these different things determine their rates. Typically, what we've discovered is that premiums are about 40% less than the National Flood Insurance Program in most situations as we're looking inland. Coastal could be some different exceptions because private companies typically have become very limited in the coastal areas. So from a pricing standpoint, it could significantly save you money. Now let's talk about deductibles. Just like the National Flood Insurance Program where you have a deductible for each coverage, same thing with the superior private flood insurance. You got a building deductible, you have a contents deductible, you have additional living expense or loss of use deductible. So it's important when picking a deductible to understand you may end up paying 3 deductibles. Now let's talk a little bit about renewals. With the National Flood Insurance Program, they have these statutory rate increases of up to 18% on renewals. No matter what private flood insurance company you're working with, that 18% doesn't qualify with them. That's only with the National Flood Insurance Program. This means that particular private companies could skyrocket your renewals if you wanted to. However, what we've discovered is with Superior that almost 95% of their customers are renewing their policies because their renewal terms are very consistent. Do they have rate increases? Yes. Do they have rate decreases sometimes? Yes. But what we have found looking at companies in the private flood insurance industry, they are pretty consistent on slowly increasing those rates, not skyrocketing rates in certain areas. Does this mean that your policy may not get non-renewed or may get non-renewed? Yeah, it depends on their contracts. It depends if there's a certain area where their flood risk scoring system has changed. We see this with FEMA as well, where it may not necessarily be non-renewed, but your rates may skyrocket because the flood risk scoring changes. A lot of flooding has happened in an area, so we see this a lot. Now, what about claims? Now, like Superior and many private flood insurance claims, the claim process can actually be much quicker. That's actually what we've seen with Superior compared to the National Flood Insurance Program. You don't have as much red tape to go through. You're dealing directly with a private company instead of dealing with the federal government, getting everything approved. So it can be much quicker. So this is the difference between Superior private flood insurance and the federal flood insurance program when it comes to things like coverages, when it comes to pricing, renewals, and claims. Now here at the Flood Insurance Guru, we offer Superior private flood insurance as a solution to our clients. We offer the federal program, and we offer about 20 other options on private flood insurance on the residential and the commercial side. Now in this particular video, we've talked about residential coverages. We'll cover commercial in a different video. Hopefully this gives you a good understanding of comparing the National Flood Insurance Program or the federal flood program with Superior private flood insurance. We'll also have a link in the description where you can get a more detailed guide on comparing private flood insurance with the federal program. You can also click on the corner of this video to get a brief video explanation of the difference in these two. My name is Chris Green. I want to say thank you for tuning in today's video on Superior private flood insurance versus the federal flood insurance program.